From the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power alongside Joe Matthew. I'm Kaylee Lyons.
In 1 hour, the proceedings will begin again from the floor here in Milwaukee at the RNC. Expected to speak tonight, former presidential candidate Nikki Haley.
And joining us this hour as we look ahead to night two, RNC co-chair Lara Trump, Alabama Senator Katie Britt, and Florida Congressman Byron Donalds.
And New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, convicted in a Manhattan courtroom on federal charges of bribery, extortion, and more. 16 counts in all. Will have reaction from our political panel. Kaylee, here we go again. Day two, night two in this case for the RNC, and pretty interesting to see Nikki Haley, who at one point wasn't even invited to this convention. A lot of questions about what her message will be.
Yeah, we're all waiting to see. Of course, speaking right after her, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Marco Rubio will also speak tonight. All of these people who have competed against Donald Trump for the presidency before. So as this party tries to preach unity, not just within the country, but within the party itself, very interesting to consider how the tone may be this evening, which of course is themed Make America Safe Again.
Yeah, we've got crime and immigration, the theme here, and this is just one night after J.D. Vance was rolled out, and to see him in the Trump family box with the former president and Tucker Carlson was quite an image. The crowd loved it.
Yeah, so let's see how the crowd's doing this evening and get a live look at the convention floor where Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is now. Tyler, what's the energy like on night two?
Yeah, hey, Kaylee. So the energy is still pretty high, but right now on the arena floor, they're just setting up as we expect that program to start in a little over an hour. We're going to walk around here and give you a sense of what's happening in this room right now. Of course, we're expecting 50,000 attendees to stream into the convention over the course of this week. Right now, we have some of the delegates already inside, some lawmakers talking among them. And on every seat, we have a Trump Make America Great Again sign. You can expect those probably to be waved during the speeches tonight. Now, behind me is the stage where the speakers will be. Of course, as we know, now Vice Presidential nominee J.D. Vance took the stage earlier today for a walkthrough. He will be here tomorrow, Wednesday night in primetime. Tonight, we do have the names of those that will be on the stage. We are expecting many congressional members who have been staunch defenders of former President Trump. You mentioned some of them earlier. I would add to them Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, House Speaker Mike Johnson, and then, of course, Nikki Haley will be here. She is one that we are going to be watching closely. Of course, she wasn't originally invited to speak at the convention and then was extended an invitation over the weekend after that assassination attempt against former President Trump. Joan Kelly, this was largely seen as an attempt for party unity here during the convention this week.
A word we keep hearing, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Thank you, Tyler, for bringing us inside the hall ahead of tonight's festivities as we now bring in our reporter roundtable in Milwaukee. Bloomberg's Nancy Cook and Kate Ackley are with us at the table. It's great to see both of you. Welcome. A big story here just cleared the terminal. Bloomberg Businessweek cover story, the big take, Trump on taxes, tariffs, Jerome Powell, and more. Nancy, you sat down with Donald Trump for the better part of 90 minutes in advance of this convention. The headline, the takeaway here, knowing that this took place before the events of last weekend. Give us a sense of his demeanor and what he was interested in when he sat down.
So I sat down with him and a few of my colleagues from Businessweek at Mar-a-Lago. We were there for about 90 minutes. We got 90 minutes with him. And we had a very wide-ranging conversation about the business, the U.S. economy. We talked about Taiwan, Russia, his legal cases. This was before the shooting and 2 days before the debate, just to give you a sense of his mindset. But he was in a great mood. He had just come back from a Louisiana fundraiser. The fundraising numbers were starting to pick up much faster than they had anticipated. The polling was showing him doing really well and starting to expand the map. And so he was in a great mood. And that was even before the debate 2 days later.
It's pretty incredible stuff that's in this article that everyone should read. You can find it on the terminal now and online. The idea on foreign policy, as we all get ready to hear Nikki Haley speak this evening, who focused so much of her primary campaign on foreign policy, that Trump suggested to you that the U.S. may not actually have a duty to defend Taiwan, that Taiwan maybe should actually pay the United States for protection. What should we make of that?
I thought it was a remarkable moment in the interview. We ended up asking, a lot of economic questions about sanctions against Russia, and we asked about Taiwan sort of as a throwaway question. And he basically came out and said, what has Taiwan done for us? We have been Taiwan's insurance policy for years. They stole our chips business. I'm just not sure it makes sense for us to, keep defending them when China wants them so badly. It was a really remarkable moment.
Well, there were a lot of them in here. And again, you can read this as of right now. There's even the photographs are compelling, knowing what he has gone through. And for you to talk to him on the eve of the debate and the weekend that we just had is quite remarkable. Kate, talking about fundraising here, the incredible reversal that we've seen. I suspect we'll talk to Lara Trump about this a bit later on in fundraising. And it was 2-1 for Joe Biden. And the way things have turned in Donald Trump's favor has been quite remarkable.
Well, you have seen some really big, Silicon Valley billionaires and, big money people have thrown their support behind what is now the Trump-Vance ticket. So that's...
They were at it long before J.D. Vance even got involved, though. There seemed to be a turning point when you follow the money.
There has been. And, I talk to people who I sort of like to call them mini donors, mini big donors, people on, K Street, lobbyists who represent big corporations. They don't necessarily give the billions, but they're the ones who are there at those, routine fundraisers, giving the money directly to the candidate campaigns, which, you get more bang for your buck, if you will, on those. And I think even there has started to be a turnaround where in 2016, you'd find, a handful of lobbyists or Washington insider types who were really dug in support of Trump as a candidate. And now you have a lot more.
Well, also, we should consider here the reports, including Bloomberg reporting today. Elon Musk is committing $45 million per month to a pro-Trump PAC, America PAC. He, of course, in the aftermath of the announcement of J.D. Vance as the vice presidential pick, expressed pleasure with that selection. He liked it. We know others in Silicon Valley may as well. But for Democrats, the selection of J.D. Vance may be a message of this means more of the same. Certainly, that is what President Biden tried to suggest in an NBC News interview with Lester Holt that aired last night.
It's not unusual. He's going to surround himself with people who agree completely with him. Have a voting record. I support him. Even though if you go back and listen to the things that J.D. Vance said about Trump.
Some of those things that J.D. Vance have said about Trump, as we've all become very familiar with, at least in the last 24 hours, America's Hitler, cultural heroine. He called him noxious. He says he changed his mind when he was actually president, Nancy. But is that essentially what Donald Trump has done here? For everything he outlined to you policy-wise, when you sat down with him, he expects that J.D. Vance will follow him on all of that.
Well, I think that he's made it very clear that he wants J.D. Vance to be the MAGA heir apparent. And I think that there has huge implications on foreign policy, but also implications of who they want to kind of bring into the Republican tent. I think that part of the logic in bringing him on is really to shore up support in the Rust Belt states and also into the states they really need to win, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And I think that he sees Vance as someone who is a great sort of warrior, a defender of him on TV. I think they're salivating over the idea of a Vance-Harris vice presidential debate in the late summer, early fall. And so I think, that's a lot of the reasons why they picked him.
That's going to be something to behold, assuming that debate happens. A big breaker today in the midst of our coverage in Milwaukee, and that is Bob Menendez, convicted of bribery, 16 charges following a 2-month trial in New York. He pleaded not guilty. He's going to appeal. What does this mean, if anything, politically for the Democratic Party?
Well, I think Democrats are going to still probably hold that state. But this is, when you're looking at the news, you've got the people, the Democratic divisions over President Biden, and is he going to be at the top of the ticket? It's kind of like more bad news this week for Democrats. They're just having a rough week with the news cycle. But the whole case about Bob Menendez, just, it's political money. It's foreign agent. I mean, we're talking about, Foreign Agents Registration Act, and foreign sort of influence that he's been now convicted of. So it's certainly a troubling story, and it's been a string of headlines that I think Democrats would have rather not seen.
Chuck Schumer's calling on him to step down. Will those calls grow louder now?
And I've seen outside groups, you know, Democratic and, you know, aligned with, you know, the Democratic side of the aisle also call on him to step down. Other lawmakers have as well.
All right. Bloomberg's Kate Ackley and Nancy Cook, thank you so much for joining us here in Milwaukee. And joining us next on set, Republican Senator Katie Britt of Alabama. She will be here with us live on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We see how Biden and Harris keep making things worse. And we know the current president is not capable of turning things around. His weakness is costing us our opportunity, our prosperity, our security, our safety. Each diminished, all in decline. Just like the man in the Oval Office.
That was Republican Senator Katie Britt of Alabama speaking last night at the Republican National Committee. Thanks for joining us. Live from Milwaukee, I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons on this day 2 of the convention. The senator is now with us at the table. Katie Britt of Alabama, welcome. It's wonderful to see you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you all having me, obviously being here and getting to be in front of your audience.
Well, for sure. We have a lot of questions for you. Right. That was a big moment for you last night.
It was.
If you want to reflect on that, because that was a big crowd. We keep hearing, it's only weeks ago, that you were on every shortlist, right, to be Donald Trump's running mate. We now know it's J.D. Vance. Clearly, you're supporting him. He's being framed as the future of MAGA, the future of the Republican Party.
Yeah, and the future of our country.
Do you see it that way as another young lawmaker moving this agenda forward?
So first off, when you talk about last night, what an electric moment. I mean, to walk on that stage, to feel the energy and the arena. People are coming together, not just our party, but you can feel people coming together across the nation. And so to get to be a part of that, to get to be a part of telling our party's story, talking about the message of helping hardworking Americans, helping parents, putting them back into the driver's seat, it was an honor, and it was an amazing, it was an amazing evening. For JD, I am so excited for JD. So we are freshman classmates, and in that, Wesley and I are now not just only proud for me to be able to call JD a colleague, but proud to call he and Usha friends. So the freshmen get together once a month for dinner, and it has given us an opportunity not just to only talk, policy or procedure or even personnel issues, but to really get to know each other as people. And when America hears his story, when they learn that he truly has lived the American dream, he pulled himself up. I mean, he fought through the unimaginable. When you look at his service to the nation, when you look at where he is, when you look at his vision for moving forward, the dynamic bringing he and Trump together is going to be incredible for the forgotten men and women of America. For parents, I think he will bring in a renewed energy to what we're doing, and it's going to be exciting to see this continue to move forward, then win in November, and then what we're able to do starting in January.
Well, as you speak of his vision moving forward, obviously you have a closer seat than most in getting some insight into his vision. You also sit with him on the banking committee.
Yes, we sit shoulder to shoulder on the banking committee.
And a number of policies that J.D. Vance has advocated for when we think about these kind of populist ideas include things like higher tariffs. And knowing that in the banking committee right now you spend so much time talking about high inflation and the costs everyday people are struggling with. How do you explain to voters the effect tariffs are going to have on those costs, knowing that they are likely going to drive them higher?
Well, look, and every time, and you can go back and look at JD, every time he is on the banking committee, every time he has an opportunity, he uses his 5 minutes to fight for hardworking Americans. He drives it down to how is this affecting Main Street? How is this affecting workers? How is this affecting people trying to achieve the American dream? And the truth is, we know that places like China, people like the Chinese Communist Party, have undercut the American worker are at every turn. So whether it is Alabama shrimpers or steel manufacturers, whether it is stealing our intellectual property, what they're doing, essentially stealing American wages and opportunity, is real. And so we've seen this in the last Trump administration. I mean, looked at our agriculture industry as they allowed President Trump to work to create a fair playing field for them. And so I am excited to actually take policies, then drive them down to, like, how do they affect America? How do they affect opportunity here? Making sure that we're putting Americans, American manufacturing, American capability at the forefront of every conversation. Because look, when you go back to COVID, if we learn nothing else, it's that we need to secure our supply chains. And part of that comes from making sure that we're strategic and that we're intentional. And I think you'll see that with JD, and you'll see that obviously with President Trump.
And if the result of that is higher costs, that's a price that needs to be paid.
I mean, I think you'll see wages rise, and I think that you'll see opportunity rise as well. And as we obviously work through all of these things, as we work to drive down inflation, as we work to create a better environment for workers, when we work to actually create higher pay for them, obviously those things, take a minute. But I have great confidence in the vision of President Trump and of soon-to-be Vice President Vance, and look forward to helping move policies forward to that effect.
We've had a lot of very credible economists join us here on Bloomberg TV and radio to talk to us about the inflationary impacts of tariffs coupled with making the Trump tax cuts permanent.
Yeah.
If Donald Trump is reelected, if Congress plays along, that's likely to happen. There's a big debate in Washington, I realize, going on right now. But the question then becomes, where do you cut? And without getting into the entitlements like Medicare and Social Security,
which President Trump has said he will
not. So we're just kind of nibbling around the edges here, right? There is the potential to add trillions to our debt.
So look, we are $34.5 trillion in debt. In my personal opinion, that's not only fiscally irresponsible, that's morally irresponsible. And so we've got to take a look at spending. We've got to take a look at how we do this all together. And I understand there are going to be pieces of this that we actually have to take a look at. So right now we're talking about ideas. When you put the plan on paper, that's when we need to take a look at, like, how do these things work together? I say continually, a lot of times, particularly in government, we don't take a look at how things overlap and then take a look at the trickle-down effect of those. We must do that. Look, I am on the Appropriations Committee in addition to the Banking Committee. It is frustrating to me, the Appropriations Committee, which is obviously our discretionary spending, is now only 28% of what we spend. Mandatory spending has eaten it up. We're about, I think, 72% mandatory spending. 11% of that is actually interest on the debt, which is the first time it's actually been higher than what we spend on our defense capabilities. Any nation that has hit that point, as you know and have well read, begins a downcline. So we have to have a serious conversation about all of these things. What we do know is that we've got to find a way to put America first, to put American workers first, to put American families first. We live in a global market. That is clear. That's something that is obviously important, but I don't think that we are taking enough time to drill down on these things independently. And to your point, you're right. We're going to have to look at how do these things overlap, and then what do we do moving forward? Those are serious conversations we have to have. I have confidence that President Trump will put a good plan together, and we'll be able to work diligently to get it through the House and the Senate.
All right, Republican Senator Katie Britt of Alabama, great to see you here in Milwaukee. Hopefully we'll talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
Back in Washington, we appreciate it. Now coming up, we'll have more on that Bloomberg Business Week cover story, On the Record with Donald Trump. We'll have more with Brad Stone of Bloomberg Business Week in that exclusive interview next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew, broadcasting live from Milwaukee, the scene of the Republican National Convention, where later this week, former President Donald Trump will accept the Republican nomination. And ahead of the events of this week, even ahead of the debate that happened last month, Donald Trump sat down with a number of our colleagues here at Bloomberg and said he'd let Fed Chair Jay Powell finish out his term if he is indeed reelected in November. That's just one of the headlines that comes from this exclusive interview with Bloomberg Business Week covering Trump's plans for taxes, tariffs, and more. So let's bring in Brad Stone, editor of Bloomberg Business Week, now for more. Brad, this is an encyclopedia of a story in some ways. If you want to get a better sense of what Donald Trump is thinking about policy in his second term, how hard was it to narrow down what to focus on?
Well, thanks, Kaylee. For us, it was easy because Businessweek readers are interested in business, no surprise, and the economy and the U.S.'s role in the world. And so that's the approach we took with the former president and the Trump campaign. And we really went to ask him about a plan that, at least in the estimation of many economists, is sort of unorthodox, right? His prescription for what he sees as an economy that's growing too slowly and inflation that is too high is higher tariffs, which a lot of economists think will be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices, in addition to a lower corporate tax rate, changing the U.S.'s relationship with some of its foreign allies, less regulation, more domestic oil drilling. Those are the questions that we asked him.
Fascinating read here, Brad. We learned a lot, but it's an interesting scenario because everybody already knows Donald Trump. You referred to Trumponomics, which is something I guess will play against Bidenomics here. What would be different in a Trump 2.0 since we've already lived through Donald Trump as president?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joe, and we did ask him that, and one of the responses that he gave was, of course, that he's more experienced, and he really brought that to the realm of who he would appoint, who he would surround himself with. He said that he knows everyone now, that the first time around he appointed some people who he ultimately didn't agree with, as we know. And so he really seems prepared to do that differently, to surround himself more with loyalists, people who see the world in the same way he does, clearly reflected in the choice of his vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance. And, you know, we talked to him. We asked him a couple of times what Trumponomics meant. You know, the first time around when we asked him, he really focused on the strength of the U.S. dollar. He talked about electric vehicles. At the end, we came back to it and we asked him again, and the answer was a little crisper. He said low taxes, a lower inflation, lower interest rates, and more prosperity for the U.S.
Brad, it's great to have you with us. Bloomberg Businessweek's Brad Stone. The piece is on the terminal and online, our exclusive interview with Donald Trump. And Kaylee, a fascinating conversation here. This is a deep read. We're going to have to spend some time with this later because there's a lot more than just the Federal Reserve when we talk about Trumponomics.
Yeah, including who might be in his cabinet, not ruling out Jamie Dimon for Treasury Secretary. There's a lot of nuggets in this.
Who knows? Coming up, Lara Trump, co-chair of the Republican National Committee, joins us live. A special balance of power from Milwaukee on Bloomberg.
Today is a celebration. The American spirit is alive and well. And we have once again nominated for president the founding father of the America First movement, Donald John Trump.
This November, we are not deciding simply the fate for the next 4 years. We're setting a course for the next 40 years.
Now, I know that many of you are angry, but now is the time to unite. And we have to get to work. We have to win the hearts and minds of every single American. Wake them up with truth and with wisdom.
Under Donald J. Trump, we once again will have that rip-roaring economy that lifts up all Americans. That is our tomorrow.
Sights and sounds from night one of the Republican National Convention here in Milwaukee. Thanks for joining us on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons as we prepare for night two. Even more speakers lined up, including our next guest, who is a headliner. Joining us now, Lara Trump, co-chair of the Republican National Committee. It's wonderful to see you in Milwaukee.
Thank you. Great to be with you guys.
We have a lot of questions about the Republican National Committee, about the way this convention is going to run. But we have to ask you, because you know the answer to this more than most, how Donald Trump is doing, how the former president is feeling physically and emotionally as this gets underway.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that we're less than 72 hours from what could have been a true tragedy. And obviously there was one tragic loss at that rally, and our hearts go out to that family. But, you know, he's resilient. He's the toughest man I've ever met. He's a fighter. He's doing great. Physically, he's doing great. You know, everybody got to see him for a little bit last night, walk out. And I'll tell you, the feeling there in that arena was incredible. And I think a little bit emotional. And I actually think maybe a little bit emotional for him as well. It was wonderful that we are able to go forward with this convention, that nothing has changed for this week. But I think you will see on Thursday that there will be a change in his speech. He said himself he went back and ripped up the old speech and is rewriting one.
Did.
Well, so considering that this convention did start on such a somber note in many ways, in the immediate aftermath of the attempt on his life, how do you see this changing the trajectory of the campaign? Historically, you may see a bump in polling after a convention. Fundraising, for example. What is your expectation, and did you have to reset it just because of the events of last weekend?
Well, actually, my father-in-law himself was the one who said on Saturday, actually, when we spoke to him after this happened, he said nothing changes. We want to go forward. We want to have this convention. And I think we expect to see all of those things. But I do think this is a very unique opportunity for unity. And I think that you're going to hear that from him on Thursday night. But I think that that is what we hope to get out of this convention, this moment in time, and as we go forward. Obviously, we want to win an election. We're going to be focused on that. We're going to focus on a ground game and our get out the vote efforts and all of the things necessary. But I do think this is a time to really reflect on who we are as Americans, and that there is more that unites us than divides us. And I hope we can take that all the way through the campaign, all the way to November 5th.
We were talking before you joined us about the shifts in fundraising, which, of course, you were right in the middle of, going from Joe Biden outraising Donald Trump 2-1 to essentially the reverse and more. I don't know if we're at 3-1 now or how you would describe it. But part of this convention itself is also to raise money for the campaign. How much are you targeting, and how profitable will this be?
Well, we actually had a big fundraiser earlier today, and we raised, gosh, I'm not sure exactly the figure, but it was a high dollar fundraiser, and we had a packed group of people in there. So I'm sure we'll get those numbers out soon. But yeah, this is an interesting time, and it's interesting, to your point, to see the shift. And I attribute that, of course, to my father-in-law, to Donald Trump. He has been able to really tap into something in the American people. If you look in the aftermath of that conviction in New York, the 48 hours after that, we raised $70 million. 30% of that money, though, came from people who had never once donated to Donald Trump. These are small dollar donors. These are average Americans. I think our average donation was somewhere around $70. That tells you that there is such support for this man out there. And we are so blessed, obviously, to have these great supporters. But we're bringing in new supporters, and I think that is what ultimately matters. And so we're going to continue on that trajectory. We're going to continue fundraising, and we're going to put all that money to good use. Election season is right around the corner. I think we're 60-some days away from early voting starting.
Well, so as we consider the use of the money, knowing you were just talking about all these people who are using their dollars to express their support for Donald Trump for president, there's only so much he can do as president without the buy-in of Congress. So the composition of the House and Senate is also going to matter for actually getting his agenda across. To what extent do you plan to allocate those resources into some of those more difficult races to either flip the Senate or retain the House?
Well, it's huge. It's everything. It's obviously we want to win the White House, but to your point, you can't do that much other than executive order if you don't have a House and a Senate. And we certainly want to expand the lead in the House and take back the Senate. And obviously, we have our partners at the NRCC and the NRSC who are primarily responsible for those races. But look, anywhere we as the RNC think we can be a value add and give a boost that is needed, we certainly will turn our attention. You look at a lot of very important congressional races in states like New York and California. You have some, Montana's a big state as well. And so wherever we see that we are needed, we will be there as the RNC.
Hearing the word unity a lot around this convention. You've probably used it a couple times yourself. What form will that take when Nikki Haley gets to the podium tonight? There are questions about, will she be booed? Will she be received by the crowd? What will she say to bring the crowd into her corner?
Well, we have not given her any pointers on her speech. Whatever she wants to say tonight, she will come out and say, but I think it is a show of true unity. And I don't ever think you have seen the Republican Party more united than we are right now. I mean, you had the meeting just recently with Donald Trump in D.C. with all the lawmakers, the Republican lawmakers. These are people who a lot of them have been very critical in the past of Donald Trump. They came together. They said now is the time to really unite as a party. And we're seeing that at this convention. And I think having Nikki Haley come tonight and speak at the Republican convention is huge. It is a moment that we need to see as a party. And anyone who had any questions as to would that be a problem going forward, they're going to be answered tonight. And I actually think she's going to be received really well.
Well, as we talk about this idea of unity within the Republican Party, I'm not sure the same can be said about the Democratic Party right now, as so many members of that party have come out and told Joe Biden that he needs to drop out of the race. He insists he's not doing so. But if the group pushes him in that direction, what changes for the RNC the moment that happens? What do you have to do differently if it isn't Biden leading the Democratic ticket?
Well, look, I don't think that we've seen polling with any of the proposed replacements for Biden that really give us that much concern. I think our message still stays the same, and that is you can actually look back and think about what your life was like with Donald Trump in office. And that's what we talk about here at this convention. The themes of the convention are make America safe again, wealthy again, strong again, and great again. And I think that's what we're going to continue to do throughout this election cycle. Talk to American voters and say, listen, think about how your life was so much better with Donald Trump in office. You didn't see sky-high inflation. You didn't see high gas prices, an open southern border, wars breaking out around the world, our standing on the world stage diminished. They know what they had with this man, and we have to continue to deliver that message, no matter if it's Joe Biden. And I agree with you, that is not the picture of unity on the other side of the aisle or anyone else they might put up. We are ready for it.
All right, Lara Trump, co-chair of the Republican National Committee, thank you so much for spending some time with us while in Milwaukee at this convention. Now, still ahead, we will continue our look across the aisle at President Biden's campaign schedule in the midst of the happenings here at the RNC. Our political panel, Britt Davis and Jeanne Zaino, will be with us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Inflation is down. In 3 years, we're coming down further, and we're going to have, as they say, a soft landing. Folks, you're going to see us grow faster and faster. That's not just my view. It's the view of 16 Nobel Prize-winning economists.
That was President Biden speaking at the NAACP convention in Las Vegas just a short while ago. He also sat down there for an interview with BET after yesterday speaking with Lester Holt on NBC News about how close he thinks this race will be.
We knew this was going to be a close race from the moment he announced. I think one of the arguments that get made, you have the most successful presidency of any president in modern history, maybe since Franklin Roosevelt. Passed more major legislation no one thought could get done. We're able to put together consensus. We're able to unite NATO. We're able to deal in foreign policy. Why don't you just decide to rest on those laurels? And the answer is because the job's not finished.
So joining us now here on Bloomberg TV and radio as we broadcast live from Milwaukee at the RNC, our political panel, Rick Davis, Stonecourt Capital partner, and Jeanne Zaino, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. So we're obviously all here in Milwaukee. Rick, as you have pointed out to us this week, typically when a Republican convention is going on, the Democrats leave it alone. When the Democratic convention is going on, the Republicans leave it alone. That is clearly not the strategy Joe Biden has gone with this time around, Jeanne. But given the outcome of that NBC interview last night, the narrative around still his age and acuity, is this a strategy that's proving successful?
Last night was probably the worst performance since the unfortunate debate. And so, you know, the attention that they wanted to move off of Joe Biden's age has not been successful. We even heard today Adam Schiff told donors privately that if he stays at the top of the ticket, Joe Biden will lose, the Democrats will lose the House or the Senate and are in danger of not recapturing the House. That's how dire this is. Stan Greenberg, the pollster that I'm sure Rick knows well, Democrat, trying to reach the president. The data is not looking good. And oh, by the way, the clock is ticking. 6 days before they do this virtual convention to get him the nomination. If he is not off the ticket by that point, Democrats are going to have Joe Biden at the top of the ticket. And again, those numbers are looking bleak at this point.
July 21.
July 21
is something we're
and they don't need to do it, by the way. So that's the other part of this.
Shut things down.
Exactly.
And prevent some deal from being struck. Rick, the The prescription was get him out more interviews, late conversations, go along, get him off the script. Was it wrong?
It hasn't worked. So I think you have to say that, yeah, it probably was the wrong strategy.
So keep
but
it with
then
the White
again,
House the next.
What possibly could have been the right strategy after that disastrous debate performance? I mean, they had to do something. And they were in a tailspin, and they still are. I mean, the reality is Joe Biden is a historically unpopular incumbent president running for re-election. Nobody with his numbers has ever won re-election. So they have a very serious problem because they're not going to make Joe Biden more popular between now and Election Day. The only way that they could actually achieve a successful result is to make Donald Trump less popular. This has been a very difficult week for Joe Biden to flex his anti-Trump muscle after a near assassination just a few days ago. And the tone deafness in the Lester Holt interview last night, where he went after Donald Trump after just escaping peril in Pennsylvania, is just incredible. So it's not like he's on a track right now to either hurt Donald Trump's election prospects or enhance his own. So they're stuck. They have nowhere to go.
As we talk about popularity, I'd like to ask each of you what kind of reception we think Nikki Haley will get at the convention this evening, where she is slated to speak after, throughout the course of her primary campaign, becoming more and more aggressive in her rhetoric toward former President Donald Trump. Will this be a Ted Cruz kind of booing, or could a message of unity she may bring ring true to the delegates assembled?
Well, you think about it. Ted Cruz in 2016 had almost 50% of the delegates on the floor, and he got almost booed out of the building. Nikki Haley comes in with less than 20% of those delegates as her own. I'm sure they will applaud her enthusiastically, but I would not be surprised if the floor of the convention turns into another raucous booing fest. You hear from all the leadership of the convention, oh, please don't do that. It's not the right message. I don't think the MAGA delegates really care about messaging right now. They just care about one person, Donald Trump.
I was in the hall that night, and that was loud. It was brutal for Ted Cruz. I don't know how he got off the stage. Lara Trump seemed determined to not let that happen again tonight.
Yeah, and I was glad to hear her tell you that she, they were trying very much to control that and to show that this is a tent that is open to everyone. Nikki Haley, let's face it, had a hard-fought battle, and she didn't succeed. She got some delegates, but to Rick's point, I think it's going to be hard to control. And let's face it, between 2016 and 2024, a lot has changed. This is Donald Trump's party for sure, and they feel that he is the anointed person to take the party forward. So anybody who they think is standing in the way of that, whether it's Mitch McConnell or Nikki Haley, they may get a welcome that they don't want.
Yet we remember the 10 to 20% protest vote we saw in a lot of primary states after she dropped out. Britt Davis and Jeanne, thank you so much for the great analysis. Coming up here on Bloomberg, Republican Congressman Byron Donalds joins us live. It's next on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio, live from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, at the Republican National Convention, where we are joined now by Congressman Byron Donalds of Florida. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg. Joe and I are lucky to have you here with us on set. Up until really just yesterday, we weren't totally sure that you wouldn't be the vice presidential nominee, as your name had been out there floating for many months. Obviously, it is now. J.D. Vance, feel free to share with us how you feel about that selection. But knowing that you're not going to be vice president, at least this time around, is there any other position you would look to have in a second Trump administration?
Well, first of all, you came at me with a couple of big questions. So I'm gonna leave the future alone. I'm gonna let people decide that for themselves. We'll see what happens down the line. Specifically to the decision-making process of President Trump. Everybody on that list, highly qualified. JD obviously the president has decided to choose him. And what he brings is somebody who's been rags to riches in our country, grew up in Ohio, enlisted in the Marines right out of high school, served our country, went to work in the business world, really made something of himself. It is an American story. It's an American dream story. He's going to be a great addition to the ticket. And he's also a young American, somebody who's going to have to deal with the implications of all of the solutions that we're going to bring forth under a Trump-Vance administration. So it's not just him going on the ticket and then leaving off into retirement. He's going to be living with the decisions that we're going to make America great again.
When we get back to Washington, the debate resumes over extending or making permanent the Trump tax cuts. I've been asking everybody the same question here, with apologies to Kaylee, who has to sit through this. You've seen all the estimates about what that would do to our national debt. So the question becomes, where do you cut? And if everyone says that Social Security and Medicare are off limits, that doesn't leave us a lot, does it?
Well, a couple of things. Let's talk about the Trump tax cuts. That's been the best tax policy our nation has ever had. Why do I say that? For the first time ever in American history, the federal government was receiving 20% of our economy in terms of tax revenue. That's with lower rates across the board, lower rates for middle-income families, lower rates for small businesses. When you have smart tax policy that lowers rates and actually expounds the ability for people to keep more of their money, a funny thing happens. The economy grows, and so does the Treasury. So the government didn't miss a beat in terms of being able to collect tax revenue. They had record revenues. But when you talk about where do we cut in terms of the national debt perspective, there are going to have to be some adjustments, minor early on, with respect to some programs. We're going to have to get lean with respect to the federal agencies, because we got to understand we can't live beyond our means for the future. Because if our debt continues to balloon at the rate it's ballooning, that's not sustainable. We'll probably be able to take on some additional debts, but it's going to have to be smart borrowings for the future of our country, not based on reckless spending, which is really fueled by political promises that we know so many politicians in the past simply could not keep.
Well, as we talk about politicians making promises, obviously both Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are pretty big fans of tariffs, as they have this kind of populist agenda. You just described tax cuts as being good because it's something that puts more money in people's pockets. Economically, don't higher tariffs just take that money right back out because the cost of goods is higher as a result?
But understand, when Donald Trump has used tariff policy, the entire purpose was to give our manufacturing companies in the United States, our companies here, put them on a competitive balance with foreign countries, and frankly, foreign companies who are underwritten by those countries. A lot of the trade policies that were negotiated in the past, before the first Trump administration, were actually terrible trade policies for American companies and for the American people. They sounded good in talking points, but either the deal was a bad deal for America and we could accept a bad deal because our economy was so much more dominant than everybody else across the globe, or we didn't enforce those trade policies for whatever the reasons might be. When President Trump talks about tariff policy, it is about making sure that America gets the best deal in global trade, because we all acknowledge, whether it's China or any other country around the globe, their economies are growing. So now if there's going to be a trade agreement, it's got to be fair to the American people.
You start talking about higher prices, you have to talk about the Fed. Donald Trump told Bloomberg News in an exclusive interview that he would keep Jay Powell on the job. I wonder if you think that's a good idea, because I keep hearing if we get interest rate cuts in September, Republicans are going to point to politics and talk about how this plays into the election.
Well, that's a great topic. Secretary Powell was just in the Financial Services Committee last week. I'm on that committee.
Yeah.
Had a chance to engage with him.
Sure did.
I think Secretary Powell is looking at the economy and the economy alone. Interest rate cuts in September, and I'm just going to be blunt, aren't going to really matter with respect to the stagnant economy and stagnant situation for American families under Joe Biden.
Should he cut in September, though?
It depends on if the economic levers and the economic statistics warrant a cut.
We're not there
but it's
yet.
not going to have a political impact. So I would stress, to Republicans around the country, don't view a rate cut in the vein of politics, because this stubborn inflation, which has crippled middle-income families, working families in our country, that is a stubborn inflation. The year-over-year rate might be lower today than it was a year ago.
Yes.
But the implication of Joe Biden's reckless policies has hurt the spending power of all Americans.
Let's continue this conversation in Washington. Have a great convention.
Sure.
Congressman, thank you.
Guys.
Byron Donalds of Florida with us here at the desk in Milwaukee. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. We appreciate your being with us on Balance of Power, live from the Republican National Convention. We'll be back here with a lot more tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.